On a quiet March evening in 2008, inside a small family home in Arboga, a mother was setting the dinner table while her two small children played nearby. Within minutes, that peaceful home turned into one of the most horrifying crime scenes Europe had seen in years. 3-year-old Max and 1-year-old Saga were left fighting for their lives. Their mother, Emma Janjestig, was beaten so brutally that doctors doubted she would survive. And for days, investigators had no clear suspect, until the truth slowly pointed toward a woman driven by obsession, jealousy, and revenge. This is the story of how fixation turned into murder and how one courtroom confession changed everything. If you are new here, this is Real Crime Puzzle, where we break down the most disturbing and complex true crime cases with respect and detail. Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Emma Janjestig was born on February 16, 1985 in Stockholm. She grew up in a modest but loving home as the younger of 2 daughters. And from an early age, she was especially close to her older sister Katarina. Friends later described Emma as creative, responsible, and deeply family-oriented. She loved art and design, and she dreamed of building a peaceful life centered around love and stability. At just 19 years old, Emma married her high school boyfriend Nicholas. They were young, hopeful, and like many young couples, they believed love would be enough to overcome any challenge. By the time they married, Emma was already expecting their first child. At 20, she gave birth to their son Max, and about a year and a half later, their daughter Saga was born. 2 babies in such a short period of time placed enormous pressure on a relationship that had barely begun adulthood. Raising 2 small children while still figuring out who they were as individuals created tension between Emma and Nicholas. Arguments became more frequent. Exhaustion took over. Financial stress added to emotional strain. What once felt romantic and exciting slowly turned into frustration and distance, despite their efforts to make it work. They both began to realize that staying together might cause more harm than separating. Eventually, they made the painful decision to divorce. But separation did not bring peace. Instead, it introduced a new battlefield: custody. Nicholas wanted to remain deeply involved in Max and Saga's daily lives. Emma did not deny him access. But when she began a new relationship and made plans to move, the conflict escalated. Emma met Torny Hellberg online. Their connection grew quickly. He accepted that she was a mother of 2 and openly embraced the idea of becoming part of a ready-made family. When Emma decided to move with the children to Arboga, about 150 kilometers from Stockholm, it changed everything for Nicholas. The physical distance meant he would no longer see his children every day, and the custody battle intensified. Court hearings became routine. Accusations were exchanged. Emotions ran high. At one point, Nicholas allegedly threatened Emma, a threat she reported to police, though no immediate legal action resolved the tension. The hostility between the former couple remained strong. Investigators would later examine this history very closely. Meanwhile, Emma and Torny tried to build a fresh start. They first lived in a smaller inherited home. But as their relationship became more serious and wedding plans formed for the summer of 2008, they moved into a larger house where each child would have their own room. Torny had steady employment and Emma stayed home caring for Max and Saga while hoping to return to her design career once they were older. From the outside, it appeared that Emma had finally found stability, a supportive partner, a comfortable home, and 2 young children growing up together. Neighbors saw a quiet family adjusting to life in a smaller town. Nothing suggested the violence that was about to erupt. But beneath the surface, there were unresolved tensions from the past. Nicholas still struggled with the relocation, and unknown. To Emma, someone else from Torny's past was watching from a distance, someone who felt replaced, rejected, and humiliated. For American audiences watching this case years later, it is important to understand that custody conflicts and romantic jealousy are not uncommon motives in violent crimes. But what makes this story different is how calculated and personal the attack would prove to be. This was not random. This was not burglary gone wrong. This was targeted. By early March 2008, Emma was focused on everyday routines: preparing meals, chatting with her sister online, planning family events. She had no idea that someone had already been studying her life, observing her movements, and building resentment strong enough to turn into murder. In just a matter of Days, the peaceful home in Arboga would become a crime scene, and the young family Emma fought so hard to protect would be shattered forever. March 17, 2008 began like any other Monday in Arboga. Torny left early for work. Emma stayed home with Amor, 3-year-old Max and 1-year-old Saga. The morning was routine: breakfast, cartoons, small chores. Nothing out of the ordinary. No sign that this day would become one of the darkest in Swedish criminal history. As evening approached, Emma started preparing dinner. She was also chatting online with her sister Katarina about a gift for their parents' anniversary. The conversation was casual and normal. At around 6:30 p.m., Torny called to say he would be running late and told Emma to eat without him. She continued feeding the children and returned to her computer. At exactly 7:07 p.m., the chat abruptly stopped in the middle of a sentence. Katarina could see Emma was typing. Then suddenly nothing. The message never came through. At first it seemed minor, maybe Emma had stepped away to handle the kids. But within minutes, Katarina felt uneasy. 5 minutes later, she tried calling Emma. There was no answer. She then called Torny, who said he was already on his way home and would arrive shortly. He reassured her that everything was probably fine. But when he reached the house, something immediately felt wrong. The front door was unlocked. Something Emma rarely did. Inside the home was in chaos. Items scattered across the floor, furniture out of place. At first, Torny assumed the children had been playing roughly, but then he noticed dark stains on the floor. Blood. As he walked further inside, the reality became unbearable. In the hallway, he saw what he first thought was a doll lying strangely on the ground, but as he stepped closer, he realized it was Saga. Her small body covered in blood. Her injuries so severe he could barely recognize her. A short distance away, he found Max. In similar condition, Emma was also on the floor, motionless, her face badly injured. Believing they were dead, Torny called emergency services in a state of shock, while still on the phone. Emma suddenly made a faint sound, a long, painful groan. Paramedics and police arrived quickly and discovered that all three still had weak pulses. They immediately began life-saving efforts. The injuries were catastrophic. Each victim had severe blunt force trauma to the head, massive blood loss, and open skull fractures. Doctors later confirmed that the attacker had likely used a heavy object, most likely a hammer. The brutality suggested intense rage and personal hatred. All three were rushed to the nearest hospital. Doctors were unsure if they would survive the trip, but they made it there alive. Max and Saga were placed in critical care. Emma was put into a medically induced coma and placed on life support, her condition described as serious but stable. Back at the house, forensic teams began the difficult task of reconstructing what happened. The crime scene was chaotic, belongings scattered, blood splatter on floors and walls, footprints overlapping. Paramedics had moved through quickly to save lives, which made the analysis even more complicated. Investigators calculated that the entire attack occurred within a window of approximately 13 minutes, from the last message at 7:07 p.m. to the emergency call placed shortly before 7:20 p.m. 13 minutes was all it took to destroy a family. There was no sign of forced entry, which suggested Emma likely opened the door willingly. That detail changed the direction of the investigation immediately. This was not random. The attacker was probably someone she recognized, someone she did not see as a threat at first glance. The weapon was missing, which meant the attacker had brought it and taken it away. There were no fingerprints. Likely gloves had been used. The speed of the assault and the precision of targeting all three victims indicated planning rather than impulse. For American viewers, cases involving such rapid targeted violence often point toward someone emotionally connected to the victim. Investigators knew they had to examine both Emma's past and Torny's past. Jealousy, custody disputes, former partners, anyone with a possible motive. Outside the hospital, police stood guard at Emma's room around the clock. They feared that if the attacker learned she had survived, they might attempt to finish what they started. She was the only living witness who could potentially identify the person responsible. As doctors fought to save the children, the community of Arboga waited in shock. News spread quickly. A mother and her babies brutally attacked. In their own home, people locked their doors that night. Fear replaced the quiet sense of safety the town once had. Within hours, the investigation shifted from confusion to urgency. Detectives knew the person responsible had acted with deep resentment and calculation. The question was not only who could commit such violence, but who would feel justified doing it. The answer would soon point toward someone whose obsession had been building quietly for months. Someone who believed she had been replaced and humiliated. Someone who could not accept rejection and whose anger had finally exploded into unimaginable brutality. As doctors continued fighting to save Emma and her children, investigators turned their focus toward identifying who could have committed such a calculated and brutal attack in Arboga. The lack of forced entry strongly suggested that Emma had opened the door willingly, which meant the attacker was likely someone she knew, or at least someone who appeared non-threatening. The first person detectives examined closely was Torny Hellberg. Statistically, in violent domestic crimes, the current partner is often investigated first, especially when there are no signs of burglary or robbery. Torny had discovered the scene. He was not the biological father of the children, and investigators needed to rule out the possibility of an argument escalating into violence. He was questioned immediately. His clothing was examined, his phone records were reviewed, and his movements were tracked. His employer and co-workers confirmed he had worked late that evening. Security cameras captured him walking home during the time the attack was taking place. The timeline supported his account, although investigators scrutinized every detail. His alibi held firm. Attention then shifted to Emma's ex-husband, Nicholas, the father of Max and Saga. Their custody battle had been tense. Arguments had grown heated, and at one point Nicholas had allegedly threatened Emma, which she had reported to police. For investigators, this history raised serious red flags. Nicholas was located quickly and brought in for questioning. When he was informed that his children had died from their injuries, he broke down completely, sobbing uncontrollably, repeatedly asking whether there had been a mistake. When detectives accused him of possible involvement, he reacted with shock and anger, insisting he would never harm his own children. He claimed he had been on a one-day business trip approximately 120 miles away at the time of the attack. Investigators verified hotel records, receipts, and phone data. His alibi checked out. Reluctantly, detectives had to accept that Nicholas was not physically present in Arboga when the crime occurred. With both obvious male suspects cleared, the investigation seemed to stall. Forensic teams continued combing through the chaotic scene, but the attacker had worn gloves. No usable fingerprints were recovered. The overlapping footprints left by paramedics complicated analysis. Every shoe print had to be cataloged and compared, separating emergency responders from potential suspects. Then a neighbor came forward with a critical detail. She reported seeing a small, slender figure dressed entirely in black walking near Emma and Torny's home around 5 p.m. on the day of the attack. The person wore a hood pulled low over their face, making identification impossible. But the build appeared feminine. Investigators located surveillance footage from a nearby store that showed a similarly dressed individual walking in the area. Again, the figure appeared small and slight, moving quickly, purposefully, not wandering but heading somewhere specific. The footage was grainy, but it was enough to suggest the attacker may have been a woman. When the video was shown to Torny, his reaction was immediate and unsettling. His face went pale. After a few seconds, he quietly said it looked like his former girlfriend, 31-year-old Christine Schurer. He could not say with certainty, but something about the posture and build felt familiar. Christine Schurer was originally from Hanover, born in 1977. She had an academic background in history and archaeology. She had spent time in the United States as an exchange student and later worked various jobs across Europe. On paper, she appeared intelligent and accomplished. Torny explained that they had met in 2006 while he was on vacation. What began as a brief romance developed into a long-distance relationship, but over time her behavior grew increasingly intense and possessive. When he tried to end the relationship, she refused to accept it. According to Torny, she continued calling and messaging despite his clear statements that it was over. She showed up unexpectedly, pressured him to travel with her, and even claimed at one point that she had given birth to his child and placed the baby for adoption. a claim that later unraveled under basic questioning. Investigators were struck by this detail. Fabricating a child in an attempt to manipulate someone suggests deep emotional instability and obsession. They began digging into Christine's recent movements and discovered that she had relocated to Sweden months earlier, living in an apartment near Stockholm. Phone records, travel logs, and witness statements began forming a troubling pattern. She had traveled to Arboga multiple times in the weeks leading up to the attack. Trips she could not clearly explain. It appeared she had been monitoring Torgny's new life with Emma, observing from a distance. When police went to her apartment, they learned she had abruptly packed her belongings and left for Germany the day after the attack. This sudden departure raised immediate suspicion. Authorities quickly coordinated with German police to locate her. For investigators, the pieces were beginning to align: a jealous former partner, documented obsessive behavior, unexplained trips to the crime location, and a hooded figure matching her build captured on surveillance. While circumstantial at this stage, the emerging profile suggested planning, resentment, and a motive rooted in rejection. What detectives still lacked was direct physical evidence, linking her to the crime scene, and without that, the case could fall apart. But they were about to discover digital traces that would reveal just how deeply her obsession had grown and how carefully she may have planned her revenge. When investigators finally gained full access to Christine Schurer's apartment and electronic devices, the case began to shift from suspicion to something far more concrete. What they discovered inside her laptop painted a chilling portrait of fixation, resentment, and planning. Christine had been arrested in Germany after Swedish authorities issued a warrant and coordinated with local police. When she was extradited back to Sweden, she maintained that there had been a misunderstanding. She denied any involvement in the attack in Arboga, but detectives were already building a timeline that placed her in the area repeatedly in the days leading up to March 17, 2008. Surveillance footage from a suburban bus station showed her traveling to Arboga 3 separate times during the week. Before the assault, she had no friends or employment there, no family connections, and no reasonable explanation for those trips. Investigators believed she was conducting reconnaissance, learning the layout of the neighborhood, observing when Torgny left for work and when he returned inside her rented apartment near Stockholm. Police recovered athletic shoes that matched the tread pattern of unidentified prints found at the crime scene. Forensic specialists had carefully separated the overlapping impressions left by paramedics and family members. The remaining prints were consistent with a specific brand and size, a size that matched Christine. At first, she claimed she had never owned such shoes, but her roommate contradicted her statement and confirmed that the shoes belonged to Christine. While this was still circumstantial evidence, the contradictions began damaging her credibility. The most disturbing discoveries came from her laptop. Investigators found folders filled with photographs of Torgny, some taken during their relationship, others downloaded from social media after he moved on with Emma. There were also photos of Emma and her children, copied from online profiles, stored and categorized. In one folder, investigators found images of Emma, Max, and Saga with hostile captions written beneath them. The language was bitter and resentful. It reflected a woman who believed something had been stolen from her, something she felt entitled to. The captions revealed anger not only toward Emma but toward the children as symbols of replacement. Even more alarming were the internet search histories. Christine had searched for phrases related to committing murder without leaving evidence. She had looked up methods of avoiding detection, how to clean blood, how to mislead investigators. These searches were not random curiosity. They appeared targeted and deliberate. There were also digital notes saved on her computer, rough sketches, that investigators interpreted as layout drawings of Emma and Torgny's home, including approximate positions of rooms and entrances, alongside observations about daily routines, such as when Torgny typically left for work and when he returned. It suggested she had been watching them closely. For American viewers, digital forensic evidence often becomes the silent witness in modern trials. Unlike eyewitness testimony, which can fade or distort over time, search histories and stored files preserve intent, and in this case, intent appeared dark and focused. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Emma remained under constant protection. Police officers stood guard outside her room because investigators feared that if Christine learned Emma had survived, she might attempt to silence her. Emma was the only person who could directly identify the attacker. As Emma slowly stabilized, doctors began reducing sedation. When she first regained consciousness, she could not speak due to the breathing tube, but her eyes tracked movement and recognized familiar faces. She believed she had been in a car accident. She had no memory of the assault. Police made the difficult decision not to immediately inform her of her children's deaths. But as days passed and she repeatedly asked about Max and Saga, the truth could not be postponed forever. When her family and doctors finally told her, the emotional trauma was overwhelming. She had to be sedated again. Investigators prepared carefully for the moment she would be strong enough to answer questions, because despite the growing digital evidence against Christine, they still needed Emma's account to solidify the case. They needed confirmation that the person who knocked on that door was indeed the woman whose obsession had filled an entire hard drive. As forensic analysts continued connecting footprints, travel records, and online searches, prosecutors began building a narrative of premeditation. A woman rejected by her former partner who refused to accept the end of a relationship, who relocated countries, fabricated a child, and then allegedly planned an attack designed to eliminate the new family she could not tolerate. But until Emma could remember what happened inside her own home, the case remained incomplete, and the most crucial testimony had yet to be spoken. As March turned into April 2008, the investigation was no longer centered only on physical evidence. It now depended heavily on whether Emma Jan-Jestig could remember what happened inside her home in Arboga. Doctors had gradually reduced her sedation, and while her physical wounds were slowly healing, the psychological trauma remained immense. When Emma first woke from her medically induced coma, she believed she had been in a car accident. Her memory of the attack was completely blocked. She repeatedly asked about Max and Saga, and each time her family gently explained the truth, that her children had not survived, her mind seemed unable to process it. Doctors described it as a protective psychological response, a brain shielding itself from unbearable pain. For weeks, the cycle continued. She would ask where the children were. She would be told they were gone. She would break down, and later she would ask again as if hearing it for the first time. This heartbreaking pattern illustrated the depth of trauma she had experienced. Meanwhile, prosecutors continued strengthening their case against Christine Schurer. Travel records confirmed she had taken multiple trips from the Stockholm area to Arboga in the days leading up to the attack. Surveillance footage placed her near the neighborhood, and forensic analysis linked shoe prints at the scene to a pair found in her apartment, though the murder weapon was never recovered. A hammer missing from her roommate's toolkit matched the type of blunt object believed to have caused the injuries. Christine continued to deny involvement. She claimed she had left Sweden for Germany for unrelated reasons. She insisted her internet searches were misunderstood, and she dismissed the shoe print evidence as coincidence. Without a direct eyewitness identification, the defense hoped to create reasonable doubt. About a month after the attack, Emma told her doctors she felt strong enough to visit the house. Medical staff accompanied her for emotional support. The home had been cleaned, but the structure remained the same. Walking through the doorway was like stepping back into a nightmare frozen in time. The moment she crossed the threshold, fragments of memory began returning. She remembered standing near the table texting her sister. She remembered hearing a knock at the door. She recalled opening it and seeing a small woman dressed in dark clothing. Before she could fully react, she felt a sudden violent blow to her head. Emma later described as sharp pain and disorientation. She remembered trying to protect her children, attempting to move toward them despite feeling dizzy and weak. She recalled collapsing in the hallway and being struck again. After that, everything faded into darkness. When shown photographs and later asked about the identity of the attacker, Emma stated that seeing Christine's face brought back the final image she had before losing consciousness, although her memory was not detailed enough to recount every movement. She was confident that the woman at the door was Christine. This identification became a turning point. While defense attorneys would later challenge the reliability of trauma-based memory, prosecutors argued that Emma's recognition was reinforced by prior knowledge. She already knew about Christine's obsessive behavior toward Torgny. She had, discussed the fabricated pregnancy claim and the repeated attempts at contact. This was not the identification of a stranger, but of someone she had reason to fear. With Emma's statement added to the digital evidence, travel history, and forensic findings, authorities formally charged Christine with double murder and attempted murder. She was extradited back to Sweden and placed in custody awaiting trial. During interrogations, Christine's demeanor fluctuated between calm detachment and subtle defiance. Investigators noted that she repeatedly asked to speak with Torgny, a request that was denied. Even in custody, her fixation appeared intact. For American audiences familiar with high-profile courtroom dramas, this stage often marks the shift from investigation to accountability. Yet in this case, there was still uncertainty. Much of the evidence was circumstantial. No DNA placed Christine inside the home, no murder weapon was recovered, and the defense prepared to argue that emotional instability did not equal guilt. Still, the prosecution believed they had built a compelling narrative: a rejected former partner who relocated countries, fabricated a child, conducted surveillance trips, researched how to commit murder without detection, and whose footwear matched prints left in a blood-soaked hallway. All that remained was to present the case before a court and determine whether the evidence would be enough to secure justice for Max and Saga and bring some measure of closure to Emma's shattered life. On July 29, 2008, the trial of Christine Schurer began in Sweden. The courtroom was filled with journalists, members of the public, and grieving family members. The case had already drawn international attention because of the brutality of the crime and the shocking profile of the accused. A highly educated woman with no previous violent convictions, prosecutors charged her with double murder carried out with particular cruelty, and with the attempted murder of Emma Janjestig. They laid out a timeline that painted a picture of obsession escalating into calculated violence. They presented surveillance footage, bus station records, forensic shoe print analysis, laptop search histories, and digital files containing photos and threatening captions. The prosecution argued that Christine's motive was rooted in rejection. She had been unable to accept that Torgny had moved on and built a life with Emma. Instead of processing that loss, she relocated countries, inserted herself into proximity, fabricated a pregnancy, and when those tactics failed, she allegedly chose violence. Inside the courtroom, her behavior immediately caught attention. Observers described her as smiling and waving as she entered, almost as if she were attending a social event rather than facing charges for the murder of 2 children. At times during the proceedings, she appeared amused. When graphic details of the crime scene were presented, she reportedly laughed, a reaction that deeply disturbed those present. For many in the gallery, her demeanor seemed detached from the gravity of the accusations. But a psychiatric evaluation ordered by the court concluded that she was legally sane. She understood the nature of her actions and was capable of distinguishing right from wrong. This finding eliminated any potential insanity defense. Emma Janjestig also appeared in court. Her presence was emotional and fragile. When she first saw Christine in person, she fainted. Later, she told the court that seeing her face triggered vivid memories of the attack, that final image at the doorway. Before the first blow was etched into her mind, the defense attempted to challenge the strength of the evidence. They argued that the case relied heavily on circumstantial proof. No DNA directly tied Christine to the interior of the home. The alleged murder weapon was never recovered, and trauma-based identification could be unreliable. They suggested that online searches did not necessarily equal intent and that jealousy alone did not prove murder. Prosecutors countered by emphasizing the pattern, travel records placing her in Arboga multiple times before the attack, the sudden departure to Germany immediately afterward, the matching shoe prints, the missing hammer from her roommate's toolkit, and the digital documentation of hostility toward Emma and her children. Taken together, they argued the evidence formed a cohesive narrative that could not be dismissed as coincidence. Witnesses described Christine's escalating behavior in the months before the crime, including the fabricated story about giving birth to Torgny's child and placing the baby in foster care. Investigators testified that no medical or official records supported the existence of any such child. The lie demonstrated manipulation and fixation. As the trial progressed, public opinion hardened. Media coverage across Sweden portrayed the case as one of the most disturbing acts of jealousy-driven violence in recent memory. For American viewers, it echoed themes seen in other high-profile crimes where obsession overrides rational thought and escalates into targeted brutality. After reviewing all evidence, the court found Christine guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to life imprisonment, the maximum penalty available under Swedish law. She was also ordered to pay financial compensation to Emma for the suffering caused. The verdict brought a measure of legal closure, but it did not restore what had been lost. Max and Saga were gone. Emma faced a lifetime of grief and recovery, and the quiet community of Arboga would forever remember the night when 13 minutes changed everything. Christine's calm facade, during parts of the trial, contrasted sharply with the violence she was convicted of committing. And for many observers, that contrast was the most chilling element of all. It served as a reminder that danger does not always look chaotic or visibly unstable. Sometimes it hides behind education, composure, and a carefully maintained exterior. With the conviction secured, attention slowly shifted from the courtroom to the long process of healing. But for Emma and those who loved her children, the scars of that March evening would never fully fade. After the conviction of Christine Schurer, the legal chapter of the case came to an end. But for Emma Janjestig, the emotional journey was only beginning. Surviving an attack that took the lives of both of her children left wounds far deeper than the physical scars that slowly faded. In the months following the trial, Emma focused on rehabilitation, relearning strength, rebuilding confidence, and confronting trauma that resurfaced in waves. Doctors described her survival as remarkable, considering the severity of the head injuries she sustained. But physical survival does not erase psychological devastation. Grief after violent crime is often complex, especially when the survivor carries fragments of memory from the attack itself. Emma not only mourned Max and Saga, she carried the final moments of that evening in her mind. The knock at the door, the sight of a woman dressed in dark clothing, the sudden impact and the desperate instinct to protect her children. The small town of Arboga was also changed permanently. Residents who once felt safe leaving doors unlocked now double-checked their locks at night. The idea that such calculated brutality could occur in a quiet neighborhood shook the community's sense of security. Memorials were held for Max and Saga. Neighbors left flowers and candles. And for weeks the tragedy dominated national headlines. Torgny. Hellberg remained by Emma's side throughout her recovery. Despite the trauma and public attention, their relationship endured. In the summer of 2010, they married. A private ceremony symbolizing not the erasure of the past, but the decision to continue living. Despite it, later they welcomed 2 children, together, children who would grow up knowing they had an older brother and sister whose lives were cut short. For American viewers, this case highlights a recurring theme in modern true crime, the danger of obsessive attachment that escalates when boundaries are ignored. Christine had not been a stranger lurking in darkness. She was an educated former partner who struggled to accept rejection. Her fixation evolved from repeated contact attempts to fabricated stories, from relocation to surveillance, and ultimately, to violence. The investigation also underscored the importance of digital evidence. Search histories, stored photographs, travel records, and online behavior provided a roadmap of intent. Even without a recovered murder weapon or direct DNA evidence inside the home, the digital footprint told a story of premeditation. Emma has spoken publicly about the long road to recovery, emphasizing that healing does not mean forgetting. It means learning how to live with the memories without being consumed by them. Her strength became a quiet counterpoint to the violence that once defined her story. Meanwhile, Christine began serving her life sentence within the Swedish prison system. Under Swedish law, life imprisonment can later be reviewed, but it requires extensive evaluation and judicial approval. The court's message at sentencing was clear. The crime was carried out with exceptional cruelty and warranted the most severe penalty available. The legacy of this case extends beyond one courtroom verdict. It serves as a cautionary example of how untreated obsession can spiral into catastrophic consequences. It also raises difficult questions about warning signs, repeated harassment, fabricated claims, emotional instability, and whether earlier intervention might have prevented escalation. For parents watching, it reinforces how quickly ordinary evenings can turn into tragedy. For law enforcement professionals, it demonstrates the critical role of coordinated international cooperation, digital forensics, and meticulous timeline reconstruction. And for survivors of violence, it stands as proof that survival, though painful and complicated, is possible. Emma Janjestig's story is not defined solely by the attack. It is defined by resilience, by her decision to continue building a life after unimaginable loss, and by the memory of Max and Saga, whose short lives continue to be remembered not for how they died, but for the love that surrounded them. If this story moved you or helped you understand the deeper layers behind headlines like this, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Here on Real Crime Puzzle, we bring you detailed true crime stories with respect and clarity. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and stay vigilant.